Welcome back to another episode of Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce. As always, I'm Amanda Del Buno. Today, Christine LaFave Grace speaks with Michelle Ledet Henley, President of TMG Frontline Solutions and Principal at the Manufacturing Game, about change management and building buy-in from employees who may not be on board for one of many reasons. Here's their discussion.
Michelle Ledet Henley is president of TMG Frontline Solutions, a humble, Texas-based consultancy that helps industrial organizations with change management. She also serves as principal at the Manufacturing Game, for which she develops simulation-based workshops that are designed to let plant personnel take reliability initiatives for a test drive, so to speak, to help them visualize some of the changes in processes and procedures that managers are looking for them to make. Back in October, Michelle gave a presentation on defect elimination at the Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals annual conference in Louisville, Kentucky. And she relayed a story from one memorable conversation she had with a reliability manager in Singapore. About 2% of folks working in the facility, the manager opined, shouldn't be working anywhere. All they want is a paycheck. That helped spur an aha moment for Michelle about building buy-in, as well as building teams with widely varying experience levels. Michelle, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. You know, you talked at SMRP about this realization that there was a very, very small fraction of folks who just weren't going to get on board with any change initiative, and that in the past you had spent too much time trying to get those folks on board. You advised focusing on the 98% instead because you said with them you can get it done. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you came to this realization and kind of how it sort of changed your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the conversation I had with the refinery manager in Singapore, and that was definitely an aha moment for me to hear it from him. And I think that the biggest change that it had for me personally was giving me permission, so to speak, to not have to convince everybody that this was the right thing to do. That you don't need 100%. If his number's right, there's only 2% that are not only unconvinced but unconvincible, and you really can get around those folks in order to get it done. So the part of the conversation that he and I had was, well, what is it about the other 98%? Because they're certainly not enthusiastically on board necessarily with the change, but they can be convinced, was his argument. And so we talked about kind of three categories of people that are resistant to change, but given the right circumstances, you can probably get them on board. So there were folks that didn't understand what you were asking them to do. There were folks that didn't realize that they actually had a role in the process. They thought it was great if somebody else did it, but they didn't think it impacted them. And then finally there was a group of people who had been burned before. So they had kind of gotten enthusiastically on board with something, and then it didn't last, and you weren't going to fool them again. So part of what he and I discussed was making sure that the approach we were taking with his refinery addressed all of those folks. And we knew we weren't going to get everybody, but if we could get 98% on board, that was going to make a huge difference for us.
That's great. One of the things you pointed out, too, is that unfortunately the 2% are often vocal. So how do you, sort of overcome that factor of things when you may have people, you're working really hard and you've got the people that you can convince and you can educate them and help get them on board. But when you've got that small group that's just the naysayers, the loud naysayers, how do you strike that balance without, again, devoting too much of your time to people who are just never going to get there?
What I found to be the key to that success is just to go get it done. And so for me, that's meant going after smaller improvements. So rather than trying to do something that's going to take a year or 2 years to get done, focus on something that can get done in 90 days or less, just to kind of prove it. Because, again, I think the biggest way to stop those guys is to go prove them wrong. Get it done, have the other 98% see, oh, we are actually doing this no matter what that guy says. It makes it easier to ignore them when there's actually progress being made. That's been the most important thing to us is to create those small opportunities where lots of people can participate, lots of people can see improvements, in what impacts them directly. So not just hitting the bottom line that shareholders care about, but making for a better day at work for those folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that gets to another point that you had brought up about team building and having the opportunity for plant personnel to take ownership of initiatives. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how this approach and getting those small wins can facilitate that and, again, build that sense of ownership that is so crucial to, number one, achieving goals, and number two, getting the sustainable buy-in?
Absolutely. You want something beyond malicious compliance. That only lasts as long as you're continuing to crack the whip and micromanage it. So you want people to really believe that this is the right thing to do for the organization, but also for them personally. And so one of the things that we think is really important is giving people a chance to choose what defects they want to work on. Rather than assigning them specific projects, we let them pick something that has meaning to them. That's typically where you get the buy-in. And the other piece of it is having them take it all the way through the process. So we insist on the teams taking action, not just making recommendations. Very easy to come up with a laundry list of things that you think someone else should be taking care of. But you really have buy-in when you're going to take the initiative and you're going to take the actions that are going to make the defect go away. So we make sure that they pick something that's important to them, but that they follow it all the way through the process.
That's great. What are some best practices then, when it's, like you say, it's easy to come up with a laundry list of things that you'd like to do. When you're getting a team together and maybe they haven't worked together or haven't worked together really well in the past, what are some best practices for starting out to get them on a productive path? What resources help with that?
Well, what we specifically use is a 2-day workshop where we expose them to this concept of defect elimination, and during the course of that 2 days, we're talking about lots and lots and lots of examples. So on the back end of that, it's pretty rare that they have trouble thinking of something to work on. But outside of the workshop, what we found to be very helpful is having 2 things, basically a list of examples of things that have already been done, and then just a list of problem areas that you know about. So, again, we're not assigning them to work on something, but if you throw a list of things up there, they're like, oh, yeah, that one. That's the one that drives me crazy. It just kind of prompts them from a blank piece of paper to, there's something I might choose to work on.
That's great. You mentioned, too, at the SMRP conference, with some of these defect elimination projects, maybe you set some parameters of, a team can't spend more than about $5,000. A project needs to be completed within 90 days. What's, the value of that kind of specific guidance as well?
Yeah, so back to your question about buy-in. You want the teams to really take ownership of these projects and not feel like they're being voluntold to do them, that they're choosing to do things on their own. But, of course, you can't have complete chaos. You can't have people working on just anything. And that's where management comes in and sets the boundaries. And so they're really setting the rules that they're willing to live with and allow the teams to work within that set of rules and step back and not micromanage. And I think that's the hardest part that management tends to have is they want a list of projects and then they want to priority rank them and all that kind of stuff. And when you do that, you make it the best project to come out of it, but what you're not getting is buy-in because you're now deciding rather than letting the team decide. So what we ask management to do is create a set of boundaries that they're willing to live with. And those boundaries can be as tight or as loose as they want, but they have to live with it once they establish them. So we typically have said, somewhere around $5,000 in terms of external spend. So it doesn't count labor, but any external spend. A time frame somewhere around 90 days. But we've had other organizations that have said, that's too loose. We're not comfortable with that. We had a group that was going through some major changes in their processes, and they were actually having to go out to banks and get financing. And so their requirement on spend was 0 external dollars. And we were concerned that really was going to be a problem, that if you didn't have any money that the teams could spend, they wouldn't be able to find things to do. But we were very pleasantly surprised that once they realized that boundary was there and they understood why, they found all kinds of things they could do without having to spend any external money. Same thing.
Yeah, you get really creative.
Exactly. They get really creative, and they look for different projects. There's certain ones that they would say, this one, until we get all of our financing straightened out, we can't tackle this project. Let's put it on the back burner. But here's one that we can do without having to spend any money.
you think these are resourceful teams, these are resourceful individuals who go into these types of careers anyhow as problem solvers. So.
Absolutely. And again, that's really what you want coming out of this process. You want the specific defects to go away, but more importantly, you want people to be thinking about their work differently. You want them to be problem solvers. That's where you get the big bang for the buck.
One of the quotes that I loved from your presentation was you said, what I find works the best is making the work itself motivational. You have to ask people, what do they enjoy? Can you talk to me a little bit about especially how this plays out with newer employees who are looking to, especially we hear about millennials, they want to make a difference. They want to see the impact of their work. How do you see this play out?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year at SMRP, I talked specifically about motivation, and in the research that I've looked at, they talk about focusing on direct motivation rather than indirect. So indirect's the easy one to think about, right? This is where you're either giving carrots or sticks. You're rewarding people or you're punishing people if they're not doing the things that you want them to do. That works, but only for a very short period of time. What works better in the long run is focusing on the direct motivations, where the work itself is something that people enjoy doing, or they feel like the work has purpose, or they feel like the work helps them achieve some sort of potential that they have. So you mentioned millennials. They're very big on this idea of purpose. Why is it that what I do matters? I want to make sure it's more than just bringing home a paycheck. And that's one where I see a lot of opportunity just to connect people's work to the end result. And I'll give you an example I had a few years ago. We worked in a facility that made crackers, and it was a nut-free facility. And we were actually inside of the facility, and I had never realized the amount of effort that goes into being certified as nut-free, that the vending machines couldn't have nuts. If you brought nuts in your personal lunch, you could be fired for that. There were no nuts on the property. I actually have a very severe nut allergy. And so when we finished the work that we were doing there, I said to the group, listen, I now realize how incredibly inconvenient this is. And I just want to say, you may not know somebody that this benefits, but now you do, because I personally benefit from it. And so when I can read that package and it says produced in a nut-free facility, and I can eat something without being afraid of getting sick, I'm always going to think of you guys and all the effort you put into making that happen. And so I appreciate that. Thank you. I probably had 10 people come up to me afterwards and say, I really appreciate you saying that, because it is aggravating and it is a pain in the neck, and I get frustrated sometimes. But the next time I get frustrated, I'm going to remember that I'm helping you and people like you, and that's going to make it feel worthwhile. So I think there are tremendous opportunities of that, where you connect people to the end result of the work that they're doing, so that they feel like, hey, I'm not just doing this because my boss made me do it. I'm doing it because it keeps the lights on. It keeps transportation moving. It provides new pharmaceutical products that people need, or it lets people with nut allergies feel safe in what they're eating. That makes a big difference.
Incredible.
To most people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And if only more people had a chance to experience that, That leads me to one kind of follow-up and final question on that note. We hear a lot about the need to communicate the why better, that more industrial organizations are, realizing this and appreciating that. In your experience, what are some good ways to do that, some best practices for helping people understand the impact of their work in that way?
What we found to be fairly successful in that is mainly just giving people a chance to work on those types of projects cross-functionally, so they get a chance to see perspective from outside of their own area. And I'll give you an example. We had a group it was an offshore group, and we happened to have somebody from finance that was in the room and ended up on their team. And so they were talking about trying to improve reliability, and one of the operators offshore said, pointing at the finance person, you're part of the problem, that you call and you pressure us in order to increase production, and you don't understand that we're taking downtime to try and make improvements that will help us in the long run. And the finance person said, I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't ever pressure you for production. He said, yeah, you call every day to see what our production numbers are. And she said, we're in a partnership with our production, and so my responsibility is I just have to report the daily production numbers to our business partner. She said, I don't care what they are. I just need to know what the number is. And so giving people a chance to work with people they wouldn't normally work with a lot of times can help with that why.
And those simple conversations, those brief 1-minute, 2-minute exchanges that can help, distill or get rid of a misperception. So
exactly.
valuable.
It's another reason I'm a big fan of face-to-face. So, a lot more training these days is face-to-screen, a lot of computer-based training, and there are things where I think that can be incredibly effective, but what you miss out on is the chance to have those conversations. And I think that's where having some face-to-face opportunities is really important, just to give people to have those kind of almost offline side conversations that sometimes provide that big aha and let them understand the why of what they're doing rather than just the what.
Exactly. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time and speaking with me today. And on that fantastic note, it was a great presentation at SMRP. Thank you so much for going in a little more depth with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. For Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce, I'm Christine LaFave Grace. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
And that was Christine's interview with Michelle Ledet Henley. Tune in again in 2 weeks for the next installment of Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to Manufacturing Tomorrow's Workforce on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.